Hello there. Writers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your sanity. This is Jim Parsons, your writing mentor from Australia, with lesson 16 of Write That Novel Now. This week, I'm going to be looking at the plot arc of rising tension. Now, before you write to me and tell me that the quality of my teaching aids has suffered a severe downturn, let me point out this is one of the most expensive marker pens on the market, so I want no rude comments. And besides, I don't know how to draw a curve on PowerPoint. Speaking of PowerPoint, if you watched lesson 15 last week, you will have seen a rather similar plot line in my PowerPoint demonstration. They are quite different. They look a little bit alike, and it's very important you don't get confused. So what I'm going to do is just quickly put up that particular frame of PowerPoint to remind you and talk about that particular plot arc, if you can call it that, and try to deconfuse you. Now, if you did not watch lesson 15 last week, then prepare to be thoroughly confused. So what were we looking at there? Certainly that line traces the course of the character's journey towards their stated goal. Quizmerelda is heading for the Golden Key. Yes. So why is that line a little bit wavy, going up and down? Because it's following her fortune. When the line goes up, it's a piece of good fortune. Someone helps her. She finds a clue. When the line dips down, it's a problem, setback, a disaster. So it's tracing her fortunes, good and bad. And did you notice right at the end, the darkest moment, whoosh, down goes her fortunes. Her fortunes plummet to the bottom. What am I talking about here? Rising tensions. Tension. Think of it in terms of both your character being under stress and your reader being under stress, because these are the dangerous bits, the excitement, the puzzles, the problems, where our stress levels, just as in real life, go up. Anxiety and levels of danger or levels of problem solving go up. These are the difficult things. So that's what tension is. What we're doing in a plot arc of rising tension is eliminating the good stuff. You know the old line, good news doesn't sell newspapers. Well, that is equally true of a novel. It's all the bad stuff that keeps the reader reading. You're on the edge of the seat because something wrong always seems to happen just when things are going smoothly. If things went smoothly, wouldn't be much of a story. So if we're talking about tension, if you relate it to that PowerPoint slide, when the fortunes dip, what happens to the tension? Fortunes dip, tension goes up. Good fortune, tension comes down. So in the end, when we have that enormous drop in the line, when the darkest moment sees her fortunes plummet, what happens? Tension skyrockets. So the darkest moment is your peak of tension. It can even be slightly higher tension than the climax, which is when the character gets out of this situation. So I've presented that here. You can see I've shown you the DM, the darkest moment, the climax, and you notice there's a rapid falling off here. This time it's not a plummeting of fortune. This is the denouement. This is the ending of your novel. It needs to come pretty swiftly because this is where the story officially ends. This is just the nice stuff, the tidying up, the satisfying things like watching the baddie get it in the neck, seeing the hero return home triumphant, little things like that. Marriages perhaps, or they pop into bed together to celebrate, whatever. These are all here in the denouement. That's our arc of tension, but there's another word in there. It's rising tension. If you possibly can, Each stage in your plot, each of the bad things that happen should be a little stronger, a little more severe, a little more of a strain on your central character, if possible. Let's look at our standard romance. Here we go. Guy meets the girl. He's hoping that he's going to be able to get the chat to her and chat her up. That's what happens right there. Now, he chats her up. They get on famously. They get married. They have a wonderful life. A couple of delightful kids. They both get wonderful jobs. They just love one another to bits. They have the best possible life. So let's plot the tension of that. Yeah? This is where he was hopeful that he would meet her. And along this line are all these wonderfully good things that happen. It's a flat line, and you know what a flat line is. This story is dead in the water. We don't want good news. We don't want good stuff to happen. So don't write a story that doesn't have any tension. You've got to keep that tension on the rise. See if you can figure out what is happening in this diagram. Starting off, here we go. Tension's on the move. Something a little bit nastier happens. Oh, goodness me, the villain's got her captured or whatever's happening here. They're about to die, but they get out of it. Okay, look what's happened here. Here is our high point, and it's about halfway through the story. So that officially is your darkest moment. From there on, everything else that happens doesn't quite measure up how strong the darkest moment was. If this is a near death where you don't think that the character's ever going to escape the baddie, and they do, and from there on, all the events don't measure up to that. They're not quite as bad. And you end up with here, they've got a broken toenail. It's all wrong. Your darkest moment is in the wrong place. The rest of your story is an anticlimax. Fine, now what state is your story in? Is it still up here, still in the workings? Or have you started writing it and you know what you're doing? Or is it a complete manuscript? I'm going to give you a very useful tool. If your story is still in the thinking stage, use this tool to make sure that you have a good plot arc of rising tension. If you've almost finished or have finished your manuscript, you can use this as a self-test to check how good your plot arc of rising tension is. If it doesn't match this plot arc of rising tension, then it's time to go back into that story and make some savage changes. Here's what you do. Look through your story, either the one in your head that you're planning or the one on the page. Go right through and work out all the bad stuff. Never mind how they get out of the bad stuff. Never mind all the good fortune that happens. Be very selective. Look for the problems, the difficulties, the setbacks, and the minor disasters, and look for the darkness. Write them down. You can even, if you know what chapter number they're going to fall in, you can even write the chapter numbers. Chapter 3, this happens. Chapter 7, that happens. Just go through. Once you've done that, grab a piece of paper and construct an arc. Don't put animals in it. Just construct an arc. Down here, write 0, because at the start of your story, there is no tension. At the peak up here, this is darkest moment, okay, and climax, write 10. And you're going to rate the bad events in your story along a scale of 0 to 10. 0 to 10. You can call it 0 to 100 if you want to get finicky with your numbers so that you can have an 87 or a 52. That's all right too if you want. But basics, 0 to 10 is fine. Now, take the events that you've written out in order, put a mark here. Okay, so you go through your plot and have a look at it. And as you can see, logically, the first stage up is probably a 1. Something small's happened. I've given the next one a 3, so something even bigger's happened. Then a 4. Now I have a problem. I've leapt to 8, and then I go back to 2 and 1 before I get to 10. That's not a rising arc. It's not the best way to do it. Now, obviously, when you've got a lot of plot points where there are problems, setbacks, of course, There's going to be a few minor ones between the major ones. That's all right. And you might identify those that aren't so important. But if you've got 4 or 5 major setbacks and disasters, make sure the biggies have that rising scale. If there's a couple of minor things in between, that's all right. But the plot points that I supposedly put in then were supposed to be the main points in this. So just make sure that there is a steady trend upwards in tension all the way through. If, as according to this one, you do have this problem that midpoint, you've got a much bigger surge of tension that then falls back to practically nothing for almost half the book when you think about it. Then there's a sudden blip at the end. That's not good writing. You really need to find some way to reorganise. This would be close to ideal if you can manage it. And so have a look at it. If you think maybe this was really an 8 and that was a 7, you might find a way to change those around so that you get that rise happening. The other useful thing about a plot arc of rising tension is that you can use it in the planning stage without it being too confining or defining. For example, if at this point, or even as your darkest moment, well, let's take the darkest moment. If in your first run through your story, you have it that the evil genius throws your character into the shark tank, right? That's a 10 because it's very likely with their hands tied, etc., they're not going to get out of that tank alive, yes? When you get to that point, you find out that you've changed the setting. You're not in a castle. You're in some deserted forest. Not much good having a shark tank in a deserted forest. But that doesn't matter. As long as you know what the level, if you can choose a different plot point that matches the level of tension, then your story's fine. If it's up here where you had them in a situation they possibly get out of, that's all you have to do. Put them in the forest on the edge of a cliff with the enemy charging down on them. It's jump to your death or be dead. Same thing. Same level. It's still a 10. If you've constructed something here, let's say the character is walking at night and suddenly a car veers out of the gutter and makes every effort to run them down and they just narrowly leap aside. Now, tension level is good. Life was threatened, but not to the point where the reader believes they're going to lose their life. The life was threatened at that point. Okay, you decide you don't want to do that. You want to change it. So, okay, someone fires a bullet at them from an upper story window and it thuds into the wall beside them. Can you see that that's the same level as jumping aside and being narrowly run down by a car? Still that same level of tension. You would not replace being tossed into a shark tank, tied hand and foot, with a bullet hitting the wall behind you. Wrong level of tension. Makes sense to you. So you can use whatever you chose as a plot arc, get all the levels of tension right at various stages in the story, and then if you need to, you can change the event as long as you select the same level of tension. Well, there's your homework. Set yourself the task of writing out all the bad things, the setbacks, the disasters, the problems that have to be solved that get in the way of the goal. Remember, it must be towards the goal your character is heading for. Put them in order. Assign a number to them and see if you've got a good trajectory, the right plot arc. Well, that's all for lesson 16. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Until then, keep safe.